long before the first sails appeared on the horizon, before the ring of iron axes echoed through the woods, and before the name America was ever spoken, there was a world of profound complexity and ancient lineage. To understand the United States, one must first silence the modern noise of engines and industry and look upon a continent that was never a new world, but an old one. For tens of thousands of years, this land was a vast, interconnected tapestry of human experience, shaped by the ebb and flow of ice ages and the patient migration of peoples across a land bridge that no longer exists. This is not merely a story of discovery. It is a story of convergence, where the ancient traditions of the West met the unyielding spirit of the East across a vast and unforgiving ocean. The first chapters of human history in North America were written in the soil and the stone. As the great ice age receded, diverse populations spread from the subarctic reaches of the north to the sun-drenched plains of the south. These were not primitive wanderers, but architects of sophisticated societies. In the Mississippi River Valley, the Mississippian culture constructed massive earthen mounds that rivaled the pyramids of Egypt in scale, centering their world around the great city of Cahokia. At its peak, Cahokia was a bustling urban hub of trade and ritual, supporting a population larger than many contemporary European cities. To the southwest, the Ancestral Puebloans carved intricate dwellings into the sheer faces of sandstone cliffs, mastering irrigation in a land of recurring drought. Across the eastern woodlands, the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy established a sophisticated system of representative democracy and intertribal peace that would later catch the eyes of Enlightenment thinkers. By the time Europeans arrived, the continent was home to hundreds of distinct languages and cultures, each with its own laws, religions, and ancestral boundaries. The silence of the Atlantic was broken not by a single event, but by a series of tentative and often violent encounters. While Norse explorers like Leif Erikson had touched the northern fringes centuries earlier, the late 15th century marked a permanent shift in the global equilibrium. Driven by a hunger for gold, spices, and the expansion of Christendom, European powers, led by Spain and Portugal, began to push westward. When Christopher Columbus made landfall in the Caribbean in 1492, he set in motion a biological and cultural exchange of staggering proportions. This Columbian Exchange brought horses, wheat, and iron to the Americas, but it also unleashed invisible killers. Smallpox, measles, and influenza tore through indigenous populations who possessed no natural immunity. In many regions, 90% of the population perished before they ever saw a European face. This demographic collapse cleared the way for European settlement, not through superior technology alone, but through the devastating power of disease. By the early 1600s, the focus of European ambition shifted northward. While Spain consolidated its grip on the south and France moved deep into the interior for the fur trade, a struggling island nation across the sea England looked toward the Atlantic coast. The English approach to colonization was fundamentally different. It was not merely about extraction, but about occupation. In 1607, 3 small ships carrying 104 men and boys sailed into the Chesapeake Bay. They established Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement. The early years were a harrowing testament to human desperation. Plagued by malaria-infested swamps, internal factionalism, and a lack of agricultural knowledge, the colony nearly vanished during the starving time. It was the introduction of a high-quality strain of tobacco pioneered by John Rolfe, that finally gave Virginia a reason to exist in the eyes of the London investors. Tobacco required land and labor, leading to the rapid expansion of the plantation system and, fatefully, the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in 1619, as the Virginia colony grew on the back of commerce and labor. A different kind of motivation was taking root further north. In 1620, a group of religious dissenters, known as Pilgrims, landed at Plymouth, seeking a sanctuary from the perceived corruptions of the Church of England. They were followed a decade later by a much larger wave of Puritans, led by John Winthrop, who envisioned a city upon a hill, a model Christian society that would serve as a beacon to the world. These New England colonies were built on a foundation of tight-knit town structures, literacy, and rigorous self-governance. However, the same religious fervor that drove them to the coast also led to internal strife and the expulsion of those who disagreed, such as Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson. This era also saw the first major escalations of conflict with the indigenous inhabitants, such as the Pequot War and King Philip's War, which signaled the beginning of a long and bloody struggle for the dominion of the New England wilderness. The middle of the 17th century saw the English colonial project diversify and solidify. Between the aristocratic plantations of the South and the pious towns of the North, the middle colonies emerged as a diverse gateway. New Amsterdam, seized from the Dutch in 1664 and renamed New York, became a hub of international commerce. To its south, William Penn established Pennsylvania as a holy experiment, a haven for Quakers, and a refuge for various European ethnicities, emphasizing religious tolerance and fair dealings with the Lenni-Lenape people. By 1700, the 13 colonies began to take their recognizable shape on the map. They were disconnected from one another, often viewing their neighbors with suspicion, but they were all tied to the British Crown through the mercantilist system. This economic arrangement dictated that the colonies existed for the benefit of the mother country, providing raw materials and serving as a captive market for British manufactured goods. As the 18th century progressed, the colonies underwent a transformation that was both intellectual and social. The Great Awakening, a series of religious revivals, challenged established hierarchies and emphasized individual spiritual experience, while the Enlightenment introduced new ideas about natural rights and the social contract. Colonists began to see themselves not just as subjects of the king, but as Englishmen entitled to the same rights as those living in London. This growing sense of identity was tempered by the looming presence of the French to the north and west. The rivalry between Britain and France finally erupted in the mid-1700s into a global conflict known as the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War in North America. The British victory in 1763 was total, expelling French power from the continent, but the cost of victory was staggering. The British Empire was now deeply in debt. The conclusion of the war brought a temporary peace, but it also sowed the seeds of a profound rupture. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 forbade colonists from settling west of the Appalachian Mountains, an area they had just fought to secure. Simultaneously, the British Parliament began to impose a series of taxes: the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, and the Townshend Acts, without the consent of the colonial legislatures. The cry of no taxation without representation began to echo from the meeting houses of Boston to the taverns of Virginia. The long-standing policy of salutary neglect, where Britain had largely left the colonies to govern themselves, was over. In its place was a new era of imperial oversight that the colonists viewed as tyranny. The tension was no longer just about taxes or boundaries. It was about the fundamental nature of liberty and the rights of the governed. But the young nation was about to face a test that would define its survival.